My name is Lisa. When people meet me now, they see strength in my eyes, calm in my smile, and a kind of quiet authority in the way I carry myself. But what they don't see is the road I walked to get here. A road filled with shadows, betrayal, and a silence so heavy it nearly broke me. I was only 15 when my world collapsed. One moment, I was the daughter of wealthy, loving parents who adored me. My father was a respected businessman, my mother a graceful, kind-hearted woman who seemed to turn every place into a home. I still remember the warmth of our dinners, the way my mother would laugh at my father's old jokes, the way they would look at me as if I was their greatest treasure. And then, an accident, a car crash late at night when they were returning from a family friend's wedding. I wasn't with them. I was waiting at home. I waited all night until a police officer came to the door, his hat in his hand, his eyes lowered. That night, my childhood ended. I was 15 years old, alone, and utterly terrified, living with my uncle. My parents had arranged that. If something ever happened to them before I came of age, my guardian would be my father's younger brother, my uncle, Richard. At first, I thought it was a blessing. I had known Uncle Richard as a child. He had a booming laugh. He brought me candy during family gatherings, and he seemed safe. But that illusion shattered within weeks of moving into his house. Uncle Richard's home was nothing like mine. Where my parents had filled every corner with warmth, his house was cold, strict, and filled with whispers. He had a wife, Aunt Margaret, and 2 sons, Ethan, who was 19, and Mark, who was 17. From the moment I arrived, I felt like an intruder. Aunt Margaret looked at me as though I was an extra burden. She told me in hushed but sharp tones that I should be grateful for their hospitality. And my cousins, Ethan and Mark, I can still see the cruel smirks that would creep across their faces whenever I entered a room. They looked at me not as family, but as prey. At first, their cruelty was small, mocking me for crying at night, calling me orphan girl, hiding my things. But as weeks passed, the harassment grew darker. Ethan would corner me in the hallway, his breath hot as he whispered things that made my skin crawl. Mark would grab my wrist a little too tightly when passing by, holding on longer than necessary, smirking as he did. I felt unsafe in my own room, unsafe in my own skin. I tried to tell Aunt Margaret once. She only frowned, saying, "Boys will be boys. Don't provoke them." I tried to hint at it to Uncle Richard, but his eyes went cold. He said, "Lisa, you have a good future here. Don't ruin it with lies. When you're of age, I'll make sure you're taken care of." It was then I understood he knew. He didn't just know. He planned for it. The uncle's hidden plan over time, the truth became clearer. My inheritance, the wealth and properties my parents left me, were legally tied to my name. But until I turned 18, Uncle Richard controlled them as my guardian. He was living off my father's money, feeding his family, maintaining his lifestyle with it. And he had a plan. He wanted me to marry one of his sons once I turned 18. That way, everything my parents left me would remain in his bloodline. He didn't see me as his niece. He saw me as a key to wealth and power. The realization made me feel sick, and yet I stayed silent. What choice did I have? I was 15, trapped in his house, with no allies, no voice, no protection. But there was one person. His name was Daniel. He was 20 years old, working as a helper in the household, fixing things, carrying heavy items, running errands. To my uncle and cousins, he was invisible. To me, he became the only soul I could trust. Daniel noticed things. He noticed the way Ethan would corner me, the way I would shrink whenever Mark entered the room. He noticed the tears I tried to hide at night. And unlike the rest, he cared. Sometimes when no one was around, he would whisper, "Are you okay?" And I, too afraid to speak, would just nod. But my eyes told him the truth. Once after Mark had shoved me against a wall when no one was looking, Daniel found me sitting outside, hugging my knees. He didn't ask questions. He just sat near me in silence, giving me the comfort of not being alone. It was a small kindness, but for me, it was everything. Silent years, the next 3 years were a blur of survival. I learned to endure, to hide my pain, to keep my head low. Every day was a battle. Ethan and Mark's harassment grew bolder, but I grew stronger inside. Each insult, each touch, each cruel laugh, it burned something into me, something sharper than fear. It burned determination. I counted the days until my 18th birthday, like a prisoner marking lines on a wall. Every night, I whispered to myself, just survive. Just survive until you're free. I never told Daniel the full extent of what happened, but I think he knew. Sometimes I would catch him looking at me with quiet fury in his eyes, the kind that made me believe he wished he could protect me. And that silent wish kept me alive. Turning 18, and then it came. My 18th birthday. I woke up that morning with a sense of something shifting. Legally, my guardianship ended. The wealth, the properties, the inheritance, all of it would finally be transferred to my name. For years, Uncle Richard had lived fat off my parents' legacy. That day, it was slipping from his hands. I watched the panic in his eyes as he received the official letters. I watched his hands tremble when he realized control was no longer his. But he didn't give up. He tried to pressure me, to remind me of family loyalty, to push the idea that I should marry Ethan. Ethan smirked through the entire conversation, confident that he would get me like a prize. They didn't know the fire that had been building in me all those years. For 3 years, I had been silent. For 3 years, I had endured, but silence was over. The girl who entered their house at 15, broken and afraid, no longer existed. On my 18th birthday, I decided I was going to take everything back. Not just my wealth, not just my freedom. I was going to take revenge. When I turned 18, I walked into Uncle Richard's study with my head held high. He was sitting there with Ethan and Mark, their smug faces waiting for me. They expected a girl who would bow her head, thank them for their care, and agree to whatever plan they had crafted. Instead, I placed the official inheritance documents on his desk. This, I said, my voice steady, it's mine now, all of it. The silence in that room was thick. My uncle's face turned pale, his lips tightening. Ethan leaned forward, laughing softly. Come on, Lisa. You can't handle all that on your own. You'll need us. Mark smirked. Yeah, you need protection. You've always needed us. I looked at them, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt power. You're wrong, I told them. For 3 years, I survived you. And now, you'll see exactly what I can do. Exposing the truth, my first move wasn't loud. It was precise. I began digging into the accounts. Uncle Richard had been siphoning money from my trust for years, funneling it into his own businesses. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. With the help of a lawyer my father once trusted, I gathered evidence, bank records, signed withdrawals, fraudulent transfers. When Uncle Richard realized I had proof, he tried to intimidate me. He cornered me in the kitchen one night, his voice low and threatening. You think you're clever. Without me, you'd be nothing. I raised you. I looked straight into his eyes. You didn't raise me. You tried to break me. And now you'll pay for it. A week later, I filed charges. Fraud, theft, exploitation of a minor. Every crime he thought he had hidden, I dragged into the light. The day the police came for him, Ethan and Mark watched in disbelief as their father was handcuffed. Uncle Richard shouted, cursed, swore that I would regret this. But I didn't flinch. Ethan and Mark, but my revenge wasn't complete. Ethan and Mark, the ones who tormented me, who turned my teenage years into a nightmare, needed to face consequences too. I revealed the harassment. I told my lawyer everything, dates, places, details I had written down secretly in a notebook over the years. Daniel, the only witness who cared, stepped forward to confirm what he had seen. The investigation was brutal. Aunt Margaret tried to shield her sons, crying in court, calling me a liar, but the evidence was enough. Ethan and Mark were charged with harassment and assault. The moment I saw them in the courtroom, no longer smirking, no longer powerful, but scared, I felt something inside me heal. For years, I was their victim. Now, I was their judge. Daniel's place in my heart through it all, Daniel stood by me. He wasn't just a witness, he was my anchor. I remember the night after Uncle Richard's arrest. I was sitting in my old room, staring out the window, shaking with adrenaline and fear. Daniel knocked softly and asked if I was okay. For the first time in years, I let myself cry freely. I'm scared, I admitted. What if I can't handle all this? What if they come back? He looked at me with such quiet certainty. Lisa, you've already handled worse. You survived them for years. Now you're free. Something shifted between us that night. He wasn't just the kind boy who once sat with me in silence. He was the man who saw me, who believed in me when no one else did. Over time, our bond deepened. He wasn't rich, he wasn't powerful, but he was loyal, gentle, and strong in the ways that truly mattered. And for someone who had grown up surrounded by cruelty, his kindness felt like the rarest treasure. Justice and freedom. By the time I turned 19, the court had sentenced Uncle Richard to prison for financial crimes. Ethan and Mark were also sentenced for harassment. Aunt Margaret moved away, bitter and broken, blaming me for everything. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, the house was mine, quiet, peaceful, safe. And I wasn't alone. Daniel was still there. Not as a servant, not as a background figure, but as my equal, my partner. One evening, under the same roof where I once suffered, Daniel knelt in front of me, holding a simple ring. Lisa, he said softly, I don't have much, but I have love. And I swear to you, I'll never let you feel alone again. Will you marry me? Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't from pain this time. They were from joy. Yes, I whispered. 1,000 times. Yes! A new beginning. We married quietly, without fanfare, without the people who once tried to control my life. It wasn't about money or appearances or bloodlines. It was about love, respect, and freedom. Standing beside Daniel, I finally felt like I had closed the darkest chapter of my life. The girl who once cried herself to sleep in fear was gone. I was a woman now, a woman who fought back, a woman who turned her pain into power. And as I tell this story, I don't just tell it for myself. I tell it for every girl who has been silenced, every soul who has been trapped in shadows. Because revenge isn't always about hatred. Sometimes it's about reclaiming yourself, and I did. I am Lisa, and this is my bloodline revenge.